Brett.
Die, Rocky, die.
Introducing the Book of Wrestling. 25. There are certain moments and words that shaped a new era in pro wrestling.
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
Brett screwed Brett.
Die, Rocky, die.
Introducing the Book of Wrestling. 25 catchphrases that explain the Attitude Era. Tune in as we relive one of the most exciting, intense, and over-the-top times in WWE. With new interviews with the voices that made the promos, calls, and catchphrases into history. Like Shawn Michaels.
I could have easily said I'm not going to do it.
Triple H.
You're going to have to learn to eat shit like tasted it.
And X-Pac.
Kayfabe was already dead. Give me a break.
The Book of Wrestling. 25 catchphrases that explain the Attitude Era. Coming next week to Spotify. Tell someone you're listening to this podcast. Right now, tell someone. I'll wait. What did they say? No, let me guess. You know that stuff's fake, don't you? It's what every wrestling fan has heard from every non-wrestling fan in their life for as long as they can remember. Those 8 little words, or 7 if you're one for contractions, those words haunt every wrestling fan's existence. Not because they don't know that it's staged, because we do, at least from the age of 9 or 10. It's staged, and that's the point. That's why we love it. But it haunts us because of the implicit disdain, the looking down your nose at us, the failure to engage in good faith. Granted, it's less of an issue now, in the age of the Kardashians and phony Twitter accounts, than it was in, say, 1985. But for the record, let's get this out of the way up top. Yes, we know this stuff isn't real. Except here's the thing, it kind of is. From Spotify and The Ringer, this is the Book of Wrestling, 25 catchphrases that explain the Attitude Era. I'm David Shoemaker. So yeah, we know the outcomes are predetermined. We know this isn't sport in its purest sense, but it is a competition for fans' attention, for our affection or hatred, for the right to stand in the spotlight. This is what makes pro wrestling so cool. It's fully interactive. It's the only sport where being a fan really, truly matters. And part of being a wrestling fan is acting like it's real, especially when you're in the crowd at a live event. And the implicit deal with the people putting on the show is that they will act like it's real. We'll cheer and we'll boo as long as you give your whole life over to the role. It's like method acting if the method is suplexes and headbutts. Now, listen, you would never go to a play and nudge the guy next to you and say, you know, this stuff isn't real, right? Pro wrestling is like a play, a violent play, except there's no credits, there's no playbill, and there's no curtain call at the end where the cast takes a bow. Well, except for one time. This is WWE Monday Night Raw on October 6th, 1997. Shawn Michaels, the wrestling world's preeminent jackass and probably its best wrestler, is in the ring. He beat The Undertaker the night before in a Hell in a Cell match, so he and his buddy Triple H are ready to gloat.
But let me ask you a question. Who is the man? Me. Who is the show stopper? Me. Who is the main event? Me. And what is the greatest force in professional wrestling today? The Click.
Ah, the Click. That's K-L-I-Q, by the way, because everything in 90s wrestling was spelled with a Q or a Z or a double X and written in heavy metal spray paint font. The Click was 5 men: Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Sean Waltman. Michaels was the cocky ringleader, Nash was a 7-foot-tall smartass, Hall was a laid-back tough guy playing a hairy-chested Scarface knockoff, Triple H was the designated driver, and X-Pac, well, he was the kid brother. 5 guys who loved pro wrestling and who looked at the thing they loved and recognized that it was laughably out of date. In 1996, pro wrestling, WWE in particular, was, well, kind of silly. And the Clique weren't shy about pointing it out. If they thought they were too cool for wrestling, which was the reputation they had backstage, well, they kind of were. The big thing about the Clique, though, is that they had WWE owner Vince McMahon's ear. Vince liked them. And even if he recognized that they were jackasses at times, and even if he didn't always do what they wanted him to do, the Clique had a lot of sway, and they were roundly despised in the locker room for that. But Clique was also briefly the working title of the on-screen trio who would go on to be known as the much more marketable Degeneration X. Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. Rick Rude was the 4th member of DX. I don't mean to leave him out, but it really doesn't matter here. That trio, Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna, that's who Michaels is referring to here when he says Clique. And the deeper implication is intentional, because in character, Shawn Michaels' sole mission was to antagonize Vince McMahon. He was the company's owner, who wasn't entirely open about his ownership of the company. Vince's character mostly was play-by-play commentator. For years, it was an open secret that he was the boss, but on screen, he was rarely seen as the power broker. So Shawn, and I have to repeat this, in character, is needling Vince by trying to pull back the curtain and expose him as the wizard. Because what could be more obnoxious than pantsing the entire operation? But innuendo is one thing. This night, Shawn takes it a step further, or like a million steps. He asks for the production team to play highlights of his win the night before. It was pretty standard fare.
Now I know we don't have any brain surgeons in that truck, but this is a television studio per se. Do you think, Vince McMahon, you could get one of those idiots in your truck to send out my performance?
But then, rather than Michael's Undertaker footage, the audience instead sees this grainy camcorder film of 4 guys embracing in the ring inside a steel cage. 4 big, beefy dudes hugging.
That bad blood. Here we go.
Here's bad blood.
Wait a minute. What?
Oh my God, what is that?
Wait, that's not bad. That's not bad blood. That's
Madison Square Garden.
May 19th, Madison Square Garden.
This you, Shawn.
And that's Razor.
And Big Daddy Cool Diesel.
But who's that? That's you, Triple H. Wait a minute. Hey,
what is this?
You were a bad guy. I was a good guy.
You were a good guy.
What you were doing in the... Wait a minute.
I think we've seen enough.
Wait a minute. That was supposed to be Vince McMahon's biggest day. The first time Madison Square Garden had been Oh, it's off the screen. Oh, Vin Man, what's the matter? That subject's still a little too sensitive for you, Vin Man. Vinnie Mac, what's the matter? Come on, what's the matter? Is your dad rolling over in his grave?
McMahon, playing the role of announcer, is seated at the announce table beside the ring, and he is just stone-faced. He quietly tells the production team, again, this is live on the air, whether or not it's supposed to be in character is up for grabs, but he tells the production team to go to commercial. There's an old truism in pro wrestling that no matter how crazy it seems, if you're seeing it on TV, it's supposed to happen. But even if that was supposed to happen, what happened on that tape that they showed? Well, that was certainly not supposed to happen. That grainy footage was of one of the most pivotal moments in pro wrestling history. Some people ominously call it the MSG incident, but most folks just call it the curtain call. It was Madison Square Garden, May 19th, 1996. It was a house show, meaning it wasn't televised. And MSG, well, it had been the center of the WWE universe all the way back to when it was Vince McMahon's dad's company, the WWF. It had been the seat of pro wrestling in the Northeast even before that. When people in the business talked about WWE, they used to call it New York, as in, I got a job offer from New York, or Johnny's going to work up in New York. And Madison Square Garden was the beating heart of New York wrestling. WWE and MSG have been intertwined since forever. There's no more important venue in WWE history. The card that night in May 96 featured Razor Ramon, that's Scott Hall's persona, versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley, that's Triple H. And in the main event, Shawn Michaels versus Big Daddy Cool Diesel, that's Kevin Nash, inside a steel cage. It also just happened to be Razor and Diesel's last night with the company. They had both accepted deals to go to work for rival company WCW, so they were leaving. Waltman, by the way, was in rehab at this point, so he's sort of written out of the story for the night. And so to say goodbye to each other and to the fans, these four best friends, the Clique, decided to take a literal bow in the ring at the end of the night. This despite the fact that Michaels and Razor were good guys, baby faces in wrestling lingo, and Diesel and Triple H were heels. Those are the bad guys. There was no storyline reason for them to be together in a ring at all. And they wanted to go out there and celebrate together after they'd just gotten done fighting each other. Suffice it to say, this sort of thing never happened.
But at that time, oh my God, it was sacrilege.
That's Triple H. These days, most people know him as WWE's Executive Vice President of Global Talent Strategy and Development. But back in 1996, Triple H was a wrestler, not a super duper star, but a certifiable star on the rise. He's come a long way.
All the old timers, and I don't mean that in a derogatory fashion, but to guys that had spent their careers and their lives fighting over kayfabe and trying to prove that it was real. And most of those stories, a lot, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are trumped up about guys. And I did my life in bars fighting over the legitimacy of kayfabe. I'm like, no, you didn't. You didn't fight anyone.
Kayfabe. If you're a wrestling fan, you know kayfabe. You practically live kayfabe. If you're not a wrestling fan, and if you're not, thank you for listening, you need to know kayfabe. Kayfabe is the system of presenting the unreal as reality. It's the code by which all people in the wrestling industry live. It's wrestling's secret handshake. It's the beating, cheating heart of pro wrestling. In the old days, there are legends of wrestlers literally fighting to defend this industry code. Somebody comes up to a wrestler in a bar and says, "You're one of them pretend wrestlers, ain't you?" And legend says that wrestler was honor bound to prove to that guy that he was legit, as in beat the shit out of him. Day to day, though, there were more practical applications. Good guys and bad guys, baby faces and heels, they couldn't be seen together in restaurants or bars or drive together from town to town. If a wrestler's character didn't speak English, he wouldn't speak English in public. If a wrestler was storyline injured on TV, he had to limp around on crutches when he took his kids to school. As pro wrestling evolved, or as the world evolved, moreover, and the WWE ring was full of wrestling clowns and plumbers and aliens, the idea that wrestling was real was laughable. But the code of kayfabe, especially to old-timers, was still to be protected at all costs. In the locker room, the code was legislated mostly by the old guard, guys like on-screen manager Jim Cornette and announcer Jim Ross, as well as tradition-minded wrestlers like The Undertaker. If there was ever a breach of protocol, they would lose it.
Cornette was in that group and a lot of people, and they were all, it's funny because a lot of times so those things would happen and Vince would be totally fine with it. But then they would get to Vince and, talk to him about, these guys are taking a shit on you and they're disrespectful. And so then it would become a problem.
So that takes us to that night in May 96. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall are leaving the company, and the guys in the Clique decide they wanted to do something to commemorate the moment. And of course, they wanted to do it on the biggest stage of all, Madison Square Garden.
It was the first time in a long time that were back to having a sellout in Madison Square Garden. We had gone through some relatively lean years, and that was one of the biggest gates we'd had in a long time at Madison Square Garden. So, yeah, certainly all of those things added to the mystique and the aura of what eventually became the curtain call.
That's the voice of Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, the main event, the showstopper, Mr. WrestleMania. These days, he helps run NXT, which is WWE's developmental league. In 1996, though, he was a wrestler, and he was an absolute jackass. Youth, fame, illicit substances, there are a lot of reasons. Sean's general disposition in those days is as legendary as his in-ring achievement.
But again, I think that goes back to a number of young guys living in the moment and not really having that much forethought in their lives. Youth has that effect on you.
Triple H sees it the same way.
This is your family that you're driving up and down the road on, even more so than a lot of those guys, had kids and wives and all that stuff. But we spent way more time with them. So there's this really super close-knit group. And Kevin and Scott are leaving, and it's emotional for everybody.
Look, there were certainly, it was Madison Square Garden that added, of course, to the ambiance.
So that night at the Garden, Sean approached Vince McMahon and asked if they could do something out of the ordinary, an in-ring goodbye to their friends at the end of the night, a final bow, if you will. Now, there's some dispute over whether Vince actually gave them his blessing or not, whether it was a pre-planned moment or an act of outright rebellion. Michaels says he got permission.
We wouldn't have done it otherwise. In his defense, though, I don't think he grasped what it would, one, evolve into. And I also don't think that he really thought it would get the backlash that it did from the former legends who had worked so hard to keep that, as we call it in the wrestling business, to keep that kayfabe alive.
But of course, Michaels was there. He was part of it. So to get a slightly more outside point of view, I called his buddy Sean X-Pac Waltman, the fifth Beatle of the clique, who wasn't there that fateful night.
I understand the anger. I mean, because it just goes against everything, that's instilled in us coming up in the industry, in the business, So, and I get it, man. And especially the guys that the guys that have been around for a really long time. And then, he was like, stone cold. He was pissed, and I don't blame them the way everything was at the time, but it was a bunch made about not that big a deal, in my opinion, as far as kayfabe is dead now. The kayfabe was already dead. Give me a break.
Here's Triple H.
Sean went and spoke to Vince and came out and said, talk to Vince, and hey, Vince is cool with us having a moment in the ring, all of us together after the show is over, once that last match goes down. And I was like, wow, how are we going to do that? Because it was kind of a weird situation.
Triple H and Razor Ramon have their match in the next to last slot. Then comes the main event, with Michaels and Diesel in the cage. As the match ended, Triple H was standing behind the entrance curtain with Razor.
And Scott looked at me and he said, are we doing something on the end of this match? And I was like, yeah, I'm not really sure. Sean sort of said something about it to me. Did he mention it to you? He said, yeah. He said, come out at the end of the match. We're all going to do something in the ring. So we watched the match go down, and then we kind of sort of got to the end, and Scott was like, man, are we supposed to go out there? And I said, I'm not really sure. And Vince kind of leaned back into the conversation, and Scott was like, Sean said we're supposed to go out there. Am I supposed to go out there? And Vince kind of shrugged his shoulders.
Never has a shrug made so much noise.
Did you know that only 9% of plastic actually gets recycled? At Grove Collaborative, they believe it's time to ditch single-use plastic.